Okay, oddly enough, I've had countless requests for me to make this video. Simplex setup on the GODOX 685, and also too on the Xpro trigger, which I'm going to show you how to set up in the second video after this one. I like to make things really simple. By the way, GODOX's instructions for this speed light are really horrible. Grew up with speed lights. I'm familiar with their nuances and their horrible instruction manuals, and GODOX, of course, wins the award for that. This is the 685 unit. It's $110, at least is here in the United States. By the way, this is the autofocus assist lamp right up here, and this is where you'd actually plug in a 860 power pack for very fast recycle times. One of the first things people realize if they shoot a wedding or an event, no matter how many batteries you have with you, it's not going to change anything because there's only so fast you can actually drain power from 4 AA batteries. Doesn't matter if they're nickel metal hydride, doesn't matter if they're lithiums. This is why a power pack is so incredibly important for photojournalism, wedding photography, and event photography. Now, GODOX actually refers to this specific button as a wireless selection button, but what it is type. Realistically, you only need to know a few things on the back of the GODOX 685. This is the type button directly here underneath this zigzag icon. Let me actually zoom in a little bit. Over here, we actually have the mode button, which is kind of self-explanatory. Mode, we're going to go from TTL to manual to multi, which is stroboscopic photography, but we actually have 3 different types here. I'll actually scroll through the 3. Okay, and here's the 3rd. This is primary. This is where you'd be using the speed light actually on the camera, and I'm about to mount it on the XT30 here in a second. By the way, when it comes to Fujifilm, it doesn't matter if it's an XT30 or an XT3 or an Xpro 2 or a GFX. All the flash menus and the flash protocols are absolutely identical on all Fujifilm cameras. At least they are now, and have been now for the past, year and almost 2 years now. So let's actually go through this. This is what I actually call a primary type. This is where you'll be using the speed light. Now this is a green screen. Notice this. Now this is commander mode. Here you actually see this radio icon in the upper left, and this of course is slave mode. And I'll show you this in the second video after this one. This is where you would be using this speed light off of the camera in conjunction with the Xpro 2 trigger or even the XT1 trigger if you have the older one like I also do as well. So let's go through that again because this is important, and it's going to be really easy to learn how to use this speed light. I'm going to make it really simple. Okay, here we actually have radio slave, okay, primary on camera, green screen, right? Same green screen, but with radio icon. Now, what this will let you do is use this speed light or another GODOX 685 unit as commander mode, and what you would need to do, of course, is set your channels and groups for what each one does as far as the slave mode that they are connected to this as is the primary unit. So this unit is actually communicating with other speed lights. Why would you use this? Most people don't do this. This is for light layering. Say you would actually have a second one of these on a light stand with a gel on it. You're going to actually add that as a hair kicker, or another one as a background illumination out in the field. That is if you're bringing multiple speed lights and you're trying to do studio photography out in the field, which is a bit of a pain in the ass. But this is commander mode. This means that this unit is acting as a commander to communicate with other identical units for commanding their function and output. So we actually have channels we can actually set. We actually have 31 different channels, and we have different groups. We have the master group and then A, B, and C group, which are slave units, which would be identical. Say you have 3 other 685 speed lights. We don't need to go into actually commander mode, but just to recognize what it is. So we have commander, slave, and primary. Up here are function buttons. Here you can actually see exposure compensation. We actually have 3 stops over and 3 stops under. Actually, on the Fujifilm unit, one of the advantages, even though the Fujifilm speedlight is rather expensive, is you actually have 5 EV over and 5 EV under, but you only actually have 3 stops over and under on the GODOX units here. Here we obviously have a test fire, which I think that's kind of a self-explanatory what that is. So we actually have type button, mode button, and fire, and our function buttons. If you actually hold down the mode button, and I've actually never used this, you can actually lock the speed light and you hold it down for another 3 seconds. You can unlock it. If you actually hold down for 3 seconds, the top left zoom channel function button, what this will take you into is a menu for changing distance indicator, auto power off, autofocus assist beam, which I showed you in the very first part of this video, which is set for on, slave auto power off timer, beep, which I turn off. Right now I have light on for demonstration purposes, but obviously this is sucking power. You actually have 12 seconds, totally off, or always on. So I have it always on just for demonstration purposes. Okay, and I actually have mine set for feet. And to get out of this screen, we just hit this button which shows returning. So really you only need to know that you actually have a row of function buttons. You have a type button as primary, commander, and slave. Just remember these screens in the color, okay? Primary, commander, and slave. And let's go back into primary. I'm going to mount it on the Fujifilm camera here. And here we have TTL, manual, obviously. Go from full power down to 1/128th power. And we're going to hit our mode button again to stroboscopic or multi. And back to TTL. So function buttons, type button, obviously power on and off is kind of self-explanatory, right? Test button and mode button. These are the three primary buttons. Type, mode, and test. So let's turn this off. It's always a good idea never to mount your speed light on your camera with the power on, because that's a really stupid idea. And camera on first, then speed light. And in the case, and you'll see this in the second video, I actually get questions about this all the time. So let me go down into, here we go. Here we go, under flash function buttons. When you actually are just using the speed light only, and I think the worst lighting in the world, of course, is a speed light on the hot shoe, because angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. You actually have bi-die communication, not only obviously between the speed light and the camera, but they both will act as commander. In the case of the Xpro 2, whatever you actually have set on the Xpro 2, it will override anything you try to do on the camera. In other words, with the Xpro 2 trigger, or even the XT1 trigger, that will always take precedence. So if you go to adjust anything down here other than FP, which is high-speed sync, or rear curtain sync, or your AF assist. In other words, if you try to go, if you're on on your Xpro 2 trigger, if you're in TTL and you want to go down here and switch it over to manual, you'll notice it'll flicker back to TTL. And that is because in the case of the GODOX triggers, they will always override those settings on the camera, because the trigger, of course, then becomes the commander and will always tell the camera. So in other words, you cannot change the settings from, say, manual to multi, or from TTL to manual on the camera. You actually have to do that on the trigger itself. So here we are in primary mode on the camera, not commander and not slave, since we're actually mounted on the hot shoe. Let me actually zoom in here a little bit and go over here, and we're going to LED. And then we're going to set it to AF Assist. AF Assist is using, for bad lighting conditions, the red hash lighting on the front of the speed light for autofocus assist, catch light, and autofocus assist plus catch light. If you're in a club and they don't want you actually using the hash for focusing on someone's face, you could get kicked out of certain locations. You need to know when you can and cannot use your autofocus assist. For sync right now I'm at FP. This is Fujifilm's designation. It's an old designation actually for high-speed sync. How high-speed sync is as the first curtain is dropping and the second curtain is following it, there is a stroboscopic, and you can't see it because it's so fast, output from the speed light that is following to cover the entire frame. And I'll go up here to manual, multi, and TTL. Now you'll see over here on the Fujifilm, like I said, all the flash menus are the same between cameras. I can actually go over here, roll my rear command dial, but it will not let me go beyond 3 stops, because that's the limit of the GODOX unit. So, but I can also do that here on the speed light if you want. I press in my exposure compensation button, I can go 3 under and 3 over, and you'll see that reflected here. And in the case of the speed light, like I said, you can either change from the speed light or change from the camera. In the case of the speed light mounted directly to the hot shoe of the camera. If you actually change modes from manual to multi or turn it off, I would actually recommend doing that via your flash menu. A really important thing you actually should always do is either set a primary function button or set a swipe function for all your flash settings on your Fujifilm camera. Here we are in TTL. By the way, I shoot all events in all manual on the camera and TTL with exposure comp on my speed, but you need to know your sync speed on your camera. If you're going to be in right now I'm at 1/1000th of a second. You can actually see, and I'll actually switch from Auto FP, which shows as H with a lightning bolt beside it, which is the GODOX 685 designation for high-speed sync. So you'll see this icon on the speed light, but you'll see FP on your Fujifilm camera. Now I'm going to change to front curtain, and if you want to keep it really simple, front curtain, of course, is just normal first curtain. Front is first, normal first curtain, normal flash. And we're going to go to rear curtain sync, and this is the designation on the GODOX 685 for rear curtain synchronization. Okay. But always be aware of what your sync speeds are. You cannot be shooting like I'm in all manual on the camera now. If I were to say roll my shutter speed dial over to, anything above sync speed, or sync speed here on the X-T30 specifically is 1/180th of a second. If I go to 1/500th of a second, for example, I cannot, go here to FP because, excuse me, I had that backwards. Sorry about that. I should make these videos at 1 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me. What I meant to say is you cannot be in the standard front curtain sync and roll your shutter speed above your sync, which is 1/80th. So I can't shoot at 2/50th or 500, 1,000 or 2,000, 4,000 of a second. And let me go back into my flash menu here and be in front curtain sync. If I want to shoot above my sync speed, I need to be in FP, i.e. high speed sync. And of course that will change and is reflected on the GODOX 685 unit. So let's move on to video number 2 on setting up the Xpro 2 trigger and having it communicate with the 685 unit. So we're going to go out of our, let me zoom out here. We're going to go out of our normal functionality in the second video and go not into commander mode but into wireless slave mode and get our speed light off the camera, because that's always the best lighting. This is great for photojournalism and doing bounce flash photography for events and for wedding receptions, but obviously speed light mounted on the hot shoe is the most unflattering light. Well, it's closest, very, very close to the most unflattering light. So remember, primary, commander, and radio slave. Otherwise, it's going to be slave to the GODOX Xpro 2 trigger or the XT1 trigger, depending on which trigger you have, and check that out in video number 2. I had an enormous amount of requests for people wanting me to show a simple setup on this. So just remember, on your GODOX 685, you really only need to remember your function buttons, which are self-explanatory, your type button, which is this button right here, and of course GODOX calls this the wireless selection button. But all it does is it scrolls through your type functionality. Commander, slave, and primary. And of course our mode button, which of course lets you go from TTL to manual to stroboscopic. And of course our test button is self-explanatory, and so too is the on-off button. Of course this is our wheel. Go into mode, TTL, I'm going to do exposure comp. Here of course we have our wheel for choosing our exposure comp. I'm going to go, stop and 3/4 over, set it, and of course it deselects it. I want to change that here, set it, should be called an enter button. So really very simple. So let's go on to video number 2 and talk about the Xpro 2 trigger and its communication with the 685 GODOX.